He was a really crotchety man. He wasn't that old necessarily, but he had some health issues, and he was just really grumpy and grouchy almost all the time. Bragg says to this man, "Do you know what a retreat looks like?" And the soldier replied, "Yes, General, I ought to know. I have been with you for your whole campaign."
The insult comedy here in the Civil War, I mean, we've lost something that we can't put each other down the way that Lincoln and generals and all these other people are doing. I mean, there has to be a book out there somewhere of all the best burns in the insult sense of the Civil War.
Yeah, now they just cuss each other up, but these guys they very politely and ironically and in fancy words put each other down. Yes, I've been with you for your whole campaign.
Hey everyone, Scott here. One more brief word from our sponsors.
All right, so Rosecrans wires Washington. He says, "We have met with a severe disaster." Lincoln said Rosecrans was confused and stunned like a duck hit on the head. Don't you love Lincoln? Lincoln has this folksy, homey way with words, and he always gets straight to the point. I remember reading that at one point, before Rosecrans retreated, he was a Catholic, he was a devout Catholic, and somebody saw him making the sign of the cross, and they said, "That's not a good sign." If the general's making the sign of the cross and asking for God's help, we must be in trouble. So the battle ends. It's a complete disaster for the Union. It's a Confederate major victory. It's the largest battle in the Western theater, and it's the second bloodiest battle in the entire war in terms of total casualties. Gettysburg, we saw, was the first with about 50,000 total casualties. This one's going to have not quite that many, but quite a few. Let's go ahead and spell it out. The Confederates had 18,000 casualties. The Federals had 16,000, and that's significant. Again, even though it's a Confederate victory, they lose more guys. And remember, of course, that the Confederate armies tend to be smaller, so if they lose the same number of the Federals, then that hurts them much worse. This is the biggest Confederate victory in the West for the whole war, and it's the last major Confederate victory anywhere. It's not the last victory, period, but it's the last major Confederate victory. It brings no strategic reward, though. Bragg made no effort to push the Federals further back. So you kicked them out of Georgia. They went back to Chattanooga, but the Union Army is still strong. It's still there. They're going to get a chance to rest and refit. Chattanooga and all of Tennessee is still in Federal hands. So I'm not sure that it accomplished all that much for the Confederacy. What do you think?
Yeah, this is something that, I mean, we really have to group these two together, Chickamauga and Chattanooga. So
yeah, they're two sides of the same coin. They really are. That's why we just couldn't skip straight to Chattanooga.
Right. But just in some analysis, when I was looking at how some historians interpret the first part here, Chickamauga, it's interesting because those who are critical of Confederate action here would compare it to early parts of the Civil War, of the Peninsula Campaign or the Overland Campaign, where the Union could have pressed for a better victory, or they could have done more to take advantage of the situation at hand, but they didn't, and they missed a great opportunity. And James and I have always tried to present the other side too, that the Confederates had suffered many casualties, so we don't want to be too critical here, but let me just give a couple of those viewpoints, a couple quotes from historians. One by Peter Cozzens says, "Bragg had his best chance to crush the Army of the Cumberland and reverse the tide of war in the West, perhaps irrevocably, given the deepening war weariness in the North, during the first hours following the Federal flight into Chattanooga." And another historian, James McDonough, says, "Bragg failed to take advantage of the disorganized Union Army when its soldiers were despondent in defeat. Instead of attacking and maintaining momentum, Bragg elected to pursue a siege operation in which his enemy's supplies were never completely cut off." So the Confederate Army of Tennessee failed to pursue and conquer Rosencran's army, and this led later to a struggle among Bragg and his subordinates about who is to blame. It's not clear-cut that Bragg is at fault here, but one important factor is that everyone does have their eye on 1864, that it's not so much that the Confederacy has to have a resounding victory, but the North has to be dispirited enough or lack enough momentum that Lincoln can lose, a Democrat can win, and then for all intents and purposes, the Confederacy is home free. So this is something that everyone has in mind, that can we keep the Union Army from having a total knockout victory somewhere? So anyway, that's some historian perspective.
Yeah, Scott and I have said this several times already, but you cannot separate politics and what goes on the battlefield. They are absolutely critical to each other. They're hand in glove. That's why we have and we will talk a little bit more about politics too, even though this is primarily a military podcast.
Right. Well, hey, we need to wrap up this thing. So in the next episode, we're going to look at what happens at the Battle of Chattanooga. All right. Well, that was the episode for today. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope you enjoyed it. First of all, I'd like to thank the Knowlton's Rangers, and especially our spy masters, Baron Fraser, Carl from Norway, Chris from Maine, and Melissa Sarnowski. And I'll explain what that means in a second. If you want to support the show and help me keep producing this content, there are 4 easy ways for you to do it. 1, subscribe to the show and leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. If you want to do that, you can go to historyunplugpodcast.com and there you'll find instructions. 2, join our Facebook group, which you can find if you just search for History Unplugged. And please like and share posts that I put up about new episodes. 3, submit a question to me so that I can answer it on air. You can email me at info@historyonthenet.com or leave a voicemail. And again, go to historyunpluggedpodcast.com and you'll find instructions. Lastly, and I think this one is the best, is to become one of the Knowlton's Rangers. The Knowlton's Rangers were an elite reconnaissance and espionage detachment of the Continental Army in the Revolutionary War, but it's also the name of the History Unplugged membership program. Learn how to join by going to patreon.com/unplugged. So here's what you get if you become one of the Knowlton's Rangers. If you join at the level of Scout, you can get early access to new podcast episodes, along with enjoying absolutely every single episode of the History Unplugged podcast ad-free. All 270 and counting episodes. If you join at the level of Intelligence Officer, you can also get access to premium episodes, like a multi-part series on the life of Audie Murphy, the most decorated combat soldier in World War II, or the 10-part series Ottoman Lives, a series that looks at the cast of characters that made up the Ottoman Empire, such as the Sultan, the Eunuch, the harem servant girl, and the soldier. And finally, if you join at the level of Spy Master, you get all the same stuff as the Scouts and Intelligence Officers, but you also get a shout-out to you and or your business at the end of each episode, a 3-pack of hardcover history books, plus you will be put at the very front of the line for me to answer your question about history, and I can guarantee I will dedicate an episode that's about an hour long or so to your question. Sign up at patreon.com/unplugged. Again, that's patreon.com/unplugged. Anyway, those are the ways you can help out the show. Thank you so much for your support. Thanks for listening to the History Unplugged podcast. Be sure to subscribe to the show to get your daily dose of all things history related, from ancient Greece to the Cold War. We'll see you next time at the History Unplugged podcast.